Well, howdy. Welcome to the Real Leaders Podcast. Here with Kayla, and you are newly married, so congratulations. I promise if you make it out to Scottsdale, double date, we'll celebrate with you guys. Maybe for those who are not familiar with you, kind of your area of expertise where you've devoted your study, kind of what your focus is, and then I wanted to get into some specific applications of that.
Absolutely. So, I am currently the CEO of a longevity clinic. It's called Live the Wellness Space. I'm also co owner. So, really, my area of focus outside of faith, but just in my professional pursuits, has been health optimization, starting with nutrition. I studied nutrition. I really became so excited by the fact that I could change how my energy levels were, how I was feeling based on the food I was putting into my body. I didn't grow up a super healthy kid. So as I began to change what I was eating, I began to realize my energy levels were increasing. I was being more productive. So that was exciting. I then later found Dr. Daniel Amen, who is probably one of the most renowned psychiatrists. He really revolutionized the world of psychiatry by just looking at the brain instead of just making a diagnosis based on a written test, which is really the industry standard. So if you come in and you have depression, it's like, well, if you have an issue with your heart, you're going to scan your heart and image it and look and see what's going on. We weren't doing that with the brain. So studied under him for about 2 years, became a certified brain health practitioner, and then opened up Live. So really in terms of professional pursuits, I'm doing the brain health, nutrition, and overseeing my clinic where we offer a lot of functional medicine. We have some of the best practitioners, I think, in the country. Everything is very targeted, and it's just really about making people feel their best. And the new terms that are exciting is longevity. So that's extending the number of healthy years that we have on this planet. So that's what I do day to day.
Well, thank you for all of your work. So, I wanted to get, if you'd be willing, into some of the emerging field of brain science as a pastor. I find it fascinating. I've read quite a bit. I'm not even in the same universe of understanding of you, but how anxiety affects the brain, how neural pathways are formed through joy and fear, how trauma can affect the brain and can have generational implications as well. So where are we at in the emerging field of brain science? And as a Christian, like what most excites you about this new information, this new general revelation?
Well, this isn't that new, but for a long time we thought that the brain was really just set, right? That you weren't able to change it after a certain age, that you had a lot of growth when you were young, but as we got older, we were unable to change the way that our brains functioned in terms of neuroplasticity, and we weren't really able to even generate new neurons. So we now know that all of that can be changed. So every piece of information that you put into your brain, it's creating the communication pathway. So if you wake up and you have a ton of negative thoughts, let's say you have negative inputs all across your day, then those neuronal connections, it's almost like a road. It's paving this really strong connection for negativity. So the more negativity that you're exposed to, which you and I both know, today it's a ton. You open up your phone, the
Yeah.
first thing that you see in the morning is, negative news, then followed by maybe a negative boss, then followed by potentially a negative partner or relationship. All of those engagements, that's literally creating all of your neural pathways. That's the important part to know, but the exciting part is that you can change those. So if you start to put in positive inputs, let's say gratitude practice, I always say you can't be grateful and hateful at the same time. So if you start your day off with a gratitude practice, then that's one small step towards improving the way that the brain is communicating and those neural pathways. Because many of us, when we're children, can have some sort of trauma, or maybe we weren't spoken to in the right way, and that set us off in terms of neuronal connections on the wrong foot. So as you become an adult, you have the same basically hardware or response set to negativity or an input. Like as an example is, let's say, you didn't have the most encouraging home when you were a child. When you are then an adult, if someone gives you a piece of feedback, your automatic response might be to be very defensive because that's what you kind of grew up needing to do. You had all these mechanisms that your brain created for you to protect you. But if you're able to start to rewire those neuronal pathways and really, change the way that you think, it's super powerful. And I think prayer, gratitude, these are all things that are backed by science. Meditation are all really great ways to start rewiring those neural pathways.
Well, and it's interesting because to me, what I find as a Bible teacher, the the brain science and the neural pathways and the attachment theory, to me, it correlates with Scripture. The Bible's like, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The Bible talks repeatedly about being a thankful person, being a humble person, being a teachable person. The Bible talks a lot as well. Set your thoughts on that which is above. Pursue life in the spirit, not the flesh. And so maybe just talk, because for some people, their view of life or God or reality may not even be shaped as much by the truth or the scriptures as just those neural pathways and some bad habits that they've got rutted into their brain. Let me ask you this just to make it simple. Like when I talk about this with our people a little bit at church, I talk about, if you walk the same way to school every day as a kid through the woods, eventually you're going to have a well-worn path and you're going to be so habituated to traveling that path that you can almost do it, unconsciously. It just is second nature. Many of us probably similarly driving home from work, we've made that drive so many times. You get home, you're like, oh, it was almost on autopilot. I wasn't really consciously aware. And I think that there's a lot of things in our life that are in that kind of neural pathway habituation that we're just not even aware of. So let me ask you, what happens to someone's brain if they've experienced trauma? Maybe as a child they were abused, or maybe they in their teen years were in a dating relationship and there was some sort of sexual violence. What happens to the brain?
Absolutely. So this is a great example. So you literally are having very negative neural pathways created from a very early age. So it's going to be completely normal for you to have, either defensive mechanisms or really, like we can say, limited confidence, because that is a memory that's stored, and it actually is changing the way that your brain fires. And so it's something that you have to be very conscious of. And one of the sad things is in general, not related to this type of trauma as a child, but in general, we are very unaware of our emotions and what behaviors we're performing throughout the day and what emotions we're getting back. So I always recommend everyone, the first step to actually changing your neural pathways is to notice them. So if you actually can start in a journal or on a piece of paper, jotting down what you're thinking and the emotions that you have, because most people will never recognize them, then you can start to actually work on improving it and changing the way that you're thinking or specific activities that you're doing, and then the emotions that are attached to them.
So what happens I'm going to ask you some very specific questions if that's okay.
Sure.
What happens to the brain when somebody's regularly consuming pornography?
This is actually very interesting, and we have some images that we can share from SPEC studies. And without a doubt, so SPECT actually measures activity and blood flow. And when we look at the SPECT images from someone that is regularly consuming pornography, it actually looks very similar to a brain scan of someone doing some pretty heavy drugs. So it is very, of course, from a neural pathway perspective, it's very addictive. So it's the same chemicals being released as if you're consuming essentially some drugs or like a lot of sugar, but it's very addicting. So it's going to light up the regions of reward, and then you're going to always want more. So you're releasing dopamine, which is a very popular molecule these days, releasing dopamine, and then you want more and more of that. We should definitely include some pictures of the brain scans, though, of people actually watching porn on a consistent basis.
So literally it starts to rehardwire the brain and then the pleasure diminishes. So then if you're going to stay in that neural pathway and you want to get that dopamine hit and that high, which some would say it's equivalent to heroin, it's that addictive and bonding. So then what does the person need to do to continue to receive that level of dopamine hit and high as their addiction cycle grows longer?
Unfortunately, many times you see it not only increase in frequency or duration, but it can sometimes also lead to external behaviors. I won't go into like specific examples, but essentially, you need more of something to actually be satiated at the same level. So that can, of course, lead into their own personal relationships and things that they find themselves doing in terms of real in person relationships, or increasing frequency, duration, still not feeling satiated, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and this is, I think, where we see culture going, where things are getting more dark and more dastardly, and then there's more frequency and there's more intensity, and then you see the acting out. And so, the Bible says that sin leads to death, and once you start on that pathway, oftentimes people are trying to go slowly, but at some point your biological hardwiring is taking you downhill. So conversely, what happens to the brain if you don't have sex before marriage, you get married, and you're faithful to your spouse? What happens to your brain then?
Well, we don't have brain scans of quite every scenario, but I think that there is a ton of discipline being exercised in that case. So we know that, if you're someone who is going to consistently watch porn and just indulge across the board in things that you desire in the moment, that is a very different brain than a brain that can remain disciplined and essentially see the long-term strategy or the long-term rewards at the end of the tunnel. And when it comes to the neural networks, of course, if you are always someone who is going to indulge in whatever it is that you want right now, it's going to have a very different impact across the span of your life, because you're training your brain to either always indulge, or you're training your brain to be able to see the long-term vision or the reward and actually create habits as well.
Yeah. So, is it possible, if, let's say, you get married and you're faithful to your spouse, that now you're starting to build neural pathways toward marriage, toward friendship, toward praying together, toward date night, toward intimacy, and all of a sudden that kind of bonding and intensity isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just misdirected, and you could redirect it toward healthy marriage, for example?
I think absolutely. I mean, we all have control over where we direct our energy, right? And what type of discipline or habits that we want to implement. So just because you're receiving reward, so if you're receiving reward in a loving way, in a healthy way, it even though it's still activating the same centers in the brain in terms of reward center, we certainly know that directing it towards healthy behaviors is going to be a lot more beneficial for the human being at the end of the day than directing it towards unhealthy behaviors.
Yeah, I'll never forget, it was years ago. I was a brand new father. My daughter was born. She's now married with her own kid, beautiful baby boy. And s- I was in a counseling session with a guy who tragically had committed adultery on his wife. And yeah,
Oh,
need a
sorry.
second?
You cut off for
Okay.
like 20 seconds, so I only got the last part of it.
Okay. I'll start over to share a story. So I was in a counseling session as a young man, brand new father. My daughter was just born, and she's now married with a beautiful baby boy of her own. And he had tragically committed adultery on his wife. And he asked me, he's like, "Have you been faithful to your wife?" I said, "Yeah, I'm, young married, but yes." And he said, "Why have you been faithful to your wife?" I said, "Because someday when my baby girl grows up, looks me in the eye, and asks me if I was faithful to her mother, I want to be able to answer that question." And so to me, even holding my daughter, I'm thinking someday she's going to be a woman. And if her dad is a safe, trustworthy man, then maybe she'll trust her husband. If I'm not a safe, trustworthy man, maybe she won't trust her husband. So the decisions I make they're generational in their implications potentially. And compare that to, how bad is it right now? The instant gratification and the addiction to the dopamine hit, how much of that is driving decision making for many, if not most people?
Well, unfortunately, it's part of our daily exposures and habits, right? We now live in a world that everything is instantaneous. If you want to find someone on the internet to like, you can swipe and you can get 10 different rewards, let's say. We are really struggling as a society to push off for future rewards. And there are definitely things that you can do from a brain improvement standpoint to start to be able to throttle that, I guess, desire so much for reward. But we just live in a society currently that everything is really instant. If we want something, we can have it delivered to us immediately. If we want to get a dopamine hit, all that we have to do is pick up our phone. But the thing about dopamine is that we know it loves to be in homeostasis. So if you get an increase in dopamine, or dopamine hit, as most people kind of refer to it today, our natural response is to actually going to be to bring it down a little bit. So we'll feel a little bit, maybe not ultra obviously, but it will decrease a little bit. So even when people are on many stimulants, things of that nature that are increasing dopamine in the brain, the next day they almost have a little dopamine hangover. But the problem is because we have so much access to constant dopamine streams, we just stay addicted to that. So again, if you want to feel better, you can pick up your phone and you can match with someone, or you can get excitement from that. So we definitely live in a world that is permeating every area of our life, and it's very hard for people these days to stay on a track to see something through.
Do you think this leads to increase in like ADD, ADHD, the inability to focus for sustained periods of time? Because the brain has been hardwired for just jumping from one, sort of pleasure to another, and one information to another, and one dopamine hit to another.
Absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, we know that the current amount of time that people can focus has decreased significantly over the past 10 years because we are just introduced to technology. We have a computer essentially in our back pocket, and it's most certainly making a negative impact on focus.
So this leads to something interesting, and I'd love your feedback as an expert. So if you hand your child a screen and just let them be on it a lot, what are you doing to the child?
Well, you're most certainly not doing them any favors, and you're definitely doing them a disservice for the future. I mean, if you think of a child as a very malleable brain, you want to do everything that you can to help them have great focus. Even when it comes to television shows and of course iPads, there are some shows that are better than others for focus because they're not jumping around. They're not changing tasks constantly. But if you want to set your child up for success, it's really important that they still have not only are you prioritizing TV shows that are not just jumping around all the time or moving between apps, because it's automatically going to give them the neural pathways of someone with less focus. So you have a great opportunity if you're raising children to, of course, let them play with standard, like non-stimulating, non-electronic games. But if you are going to let them have an iPad or something, then you are definitely running the risk of them having less focus in the future.
So what would be some very practical things? Somebody's hearing this and they're like, okay, I've got some bad habits in my life. I could see where they've almost become habituated and I need to intentionally reset. Very practically, from diet, nutrition, exercise, hydration, screen time, just what are some habits that if people will start to regularly discipline themselves, which is interesting because we're Christians, so we talk about being disciples. Well, a disciple is literally one who's disciplined. You can't be a disciple without discipline. What would be the disciplines that then would build new, healthy neural pathways and start to cause a person to live a healthy lifestyle very, very practically?
Absolutely. A few of the main pillars are nutrition is a big one. So if people are putting essentially garbage or junk food into their bodies, then their brain is not going to operate at a very high level. Even though our brain is only about 2 to 3 pounds, it consumes about 30% of our calories as energy. So
Wow.
every single piece of food that I put into my mouth, I'm thinking, is this going to be proper fuel for my brain? Am I going to be able to think better? Am I going to feel better? And the gut and the brain are directly connected. So if you're eating a lot of very processed foods, a lot of junk food, it is really no surprise that your brain and your emotions are not going to be as peak performing as they could be. So nutrition is a big thing. There's an entire brain health diet, but the gist of it is high quality proteins, because neurotransmitters are actually made from protein. So you want to get adequate protein. Dark leafy greens, they're loaded with antioxidants, berries, and people love to say walnuts because they look like a brain. So it's kind of easy to remember. But essentially, the gist of it when it comes to nutrition is no added or refined sugars. And we really want to focus on whole foods. So that's like shopping in the perimeter of the store. The middle aisles of a grocery store, if you've ever noticed, are usually the more processed packaged goods. So if you can improve your nutrition, that's going to actually start to work on improving the health of the brain, and at the same time can also improve emotional status. Exercise is one of the best things that you can do for your mood and for your brain. So just improving your exercise routines, it actually increases something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which can help to create new neurons. So this is very important. We used to think we couldn't create new neurons. Now we know that we can, but not only can help with BDNF, but it also increases blood flow to the brain. When it comes to brain health, blood flow is so incredibly important. When you're looking at a SPECT scan and there's areas of low blood flow, it's going to actually diminish the functionality of that brain area. For example, prefrontal cortex is very involved in decision making. If you don't have good blood flow, then it's not going to be operating again at its peak performance. So getting into an exercise routine, and there's a ton of literature too of the benefits of exercise and improving mood. We live in a time where depression and anxiety and mental health disorders are the #1 cause of disability worldwide. And just a couple of these very simple, but not easy. I always say it's simple, it's not easy. So it's not easy to implement, but if you work on your nutrition, work on exercise, improving blood flow to the brain, when you work out, it also releases something called endorphins. So those endorphins are going to make you feel better. So very important. Sleep is also critical to improving mood. Tons and tons of literature on once your quality of sleep is reduced, your mood is worse, your cravings are more, you're going to be less apt to make great decisions, and you're going to be less motivated to make those decisions. So starting with the night before, ensuring that you get really high quality sleep. That means, don't let Netflix steal 3 hours of your night. So get a bedtime routine. Couple of tips in terms of sleep optimization would be keeping the room really cool. So our bodies naturally decrease in temperature every evening. So I keep my room about 65 degrees. You don't want a ton of blue light. So you want to either not look at screens or turn the TV off about 2 hours prior to bed. You don't want to eat about 3 hours prior to sleep, because if your body is digesting a really huge meal, you're not going to get into the deeper stages of sleep, because you can go to bed for 8 hours, but it also depends on the quality of sleep. So we have deep sleep, REM sleep, light sleep. Deep is the most restorative phase, so you want to have a lot of deep sleep. But if you're eating a ton and your body is digesting, then you're not going to get into those deeper stages of sleep. So that's a really simple thing, is just focusing on your sleep, nutrition, and exercise. And then when it comes to actually changing the neural pathways in the brain, it's not going to be easy, and it's going to take time. A habit can take anywhere between about 30 days to 120 days. So it's something you do need to be committed to. But I think the first step in terms of changing your mindset is to actually notice those thoughts. Because again, like you said, it's that rut that we just keep going down. So I always encourage, clients of ours to keep a journal for 3 days. What emotions did you feel all day? And then go back to that and think about how you can actually change it. It's always a great idea to start your day off with a morning routine that you don't skip. And for me, that's prayer. It can be gratitude. It can be your exercise routine in the morning. It can really be whatever makes you feel good and keeps you on a very disciplined path. But I would say those are the most concrete, simple pillars. And get outside in nature. We know that there's tons of literature on nature bathing, improving mood, and overall impacting in a positive way overall well-being. We also know there's tons of benefits of making contact with the earth, also known as grounding. So that can be very important. But getting out in nature, I would say, is the next one.
Yeah, I had 3 sons, and I'll never forget when they were little, I read a data survey. It was a sociological study. They called it dirt therapy. They found that anxious, difficult little boys, if they go outside and play in the dirt, it regulates them. And every mom knows dirt therapy, but apparently they needed to hire the sociologist to confirm what the moms knew all along. And so what does your day look like when you get up in the morning? I mean, you've studied this, you're an expert, you're brilliant, and it's really helpful, so thank you. But when you get up in the morning, what does your routine look like as you begin your day and you're ending your day? What are those habits that you've put in place based upon all the research that you have done?
Yes, it's a little bit lengthy, but I'll try to make it kind of quick. Well, I start my day off with reading the Bible. It's right next to my bed. That gives me a very positive mindset from the second that I wake up. It's not
Do
grabbing.
you real quickly, do you use like a screen or you just use like an actual old school tree gave its life Bible?
I'm just doing the old school.
That's good. Yeah. So you're not doing the blue light and you're not doing the technology. That's great.
Exactly. And also, it doesn't give my phone the opportunity to wreck my morning because if I open my phone to the Bible app, then I'm probably going to see the 10, 15, 20 notifications that I also have on my phone. So I leave the phone aside. I spend some time, think of it as working on myself and my relationship with the Lord. And then I actually it's called a spiritual disciplines journal. My friend Ben Greenfield, he's also in the health optimization space. He actually created it, but it has a Bible verse in the top. It has 3 people that you can pray for that day, 3 things that you're grateful for that day, and then you do an evening recap of what you did well and what you could have done better, essentially. So I do that every morning next. Then I always do a workout. So it could be 30 minutes some day, could be an hour some days, but moving my body is for me, one of the best forms of therapy. And I know if there was one drug and it was patented and could be sold, it would be exercise. It has benefits in every area of your life, from adding muscle, which we need, especially as we age, because something called sarcopenia begins to set in later years of life where it's harder to put on muscle than it was when you were young. So you want to build as much muscle. Muscle is also extremely healthy and very important. So I move my body. I start with a walk. I usually try to do it in the sun because if we get sunlight as soon as we wake up, it actually jump starts our circadian rhythm. So our circadian rhythm is our sleep-wake cycle. And if you think about it, our ancestors used to rise with the sun, go to sleep as the sun set. They were grounded, so they were actually making contact with the earth. And it was very clear to their bodies what time of day it was. Now we have a screen in our face, blue light, fluorescent light in the office. So I get sunshine. When it enters the eyes, it tells the brain essentially it's time to wake up. So I usually walk to the gym and get sunlight. So I have my sunlight, I have my prayer, my sunlight, my workout. And then when I come home, I do a cold shower because it has tons of benefits. It's a natural way to increase dopamine. A lot of the studies are saying about 2.5 times increase in dopamine, which is our motivation and motivation molecule, essentially. It's giving us that drive. It releases endorphins, so makes you feel better. And it can do a variety of other things, such as like reducing inflammation, which we know is super important for brain health and overall health. And it's doing something hard. So I'm doing a lot of hard things in the morning so that I can actually be proud of myself. And that I always say one win leads to many wins. If you have these small wins that are completely in your control, then those are most likely going to continue throughout the day. Then I do a little bit of red light therapy. So red light therapy, have you seen these panels?
Mm-hmm.
So red light therapy is really great for skin health. It can be great for reducing inflammation. They're doing some studies even on vision and a variety of different things. Light therapy is becoming kind of an emerging field. Even for brain health, they're doing a lot of studies with intranasal red light therapy or photobiomodulation. So then I do a little bit of red light therapy, and that's about it. Then I start my day.
Kayla, you are helpful. Very, your IQ is up there. I mean, I process pretty fast and I'm chasing you down the road, but your car's getting further away. Thank you for all of your study. Thank you for all of your research. And thank you that you love Jesus and you love people and you're trying to help them to live the best life that they can and to not miss the opportunities because of wellness issues that God has for them. For those who want to follow you, and they should, and learn more, and I will, where's the best place to just stay up to date with you and continue to learn as you learn? I know God's teaching you new things all the time, and you're sharing them. How could we stay up to speed with you?
Instagram is the best place, and my Instagram is just my name. Well, it's actually my old name because now I'm married, so I got to figure that out. But um,
Uh-oh.
I know I officially did,
Uh-oh.
of
We
course.
got ourselves a marital brand crisis. I'm sorry to hear that. Yes.
I know, but I have officially changed my last name, but my Instagram is still at Kayla Barnes, KaylaBarnes. But it will be changing to Kayla Lentz here very soon.
That's awesome. Anything we could be praying for you and your husband about as you're newly married and kind of jumping into this season of life?
You know, I would say just to give us clarity, we have a lot of big decisions in the future about where we're going to live for good. I told you we're expanding my business, so we just hope that God will make it clear where he wants us to be and that we have peace with that.
Okay, we'll be praying for you. And like I said, if you ever make it out to Arizona, double date with Grace and I would love to meet your husband. And you and my wife, you will have a lot to talk about. She thinks a lot like you. She studies the same thing. She finds it fascinating. And every time I've listened to her, I've improved my health. And when I didn't, I felt it. So thank you for serving. We love and appreciate you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Cool. Thanks, Kayla.